So I would just invite you all as environmental educators to think about how you can bring a recognition of this history into your own work and in the things that you do as an environmental educator. The world has changed quite a bit since less than a month ago. A month ago, we thought we would all be together at Snow Mountain Ranch, sharing and learning environmental education in person. Today, we're being asked to do things in completely different ways than we've ever done them before. And some of that, we're seeing a lot of successes, and we're also seeing a lot of challenges that are popping up and a lot of new ways that we need to navigate the work that we do as environmental educators. But what I think is really important and what's been really clear to me in the last couple of weeks is that environmental education, environmental and outdoor learning is really important, and the work that all of you do is so, so important. And whether you're thinking about how pandemics like the one we're in are a result of our relationship with the environment and the importance of learning about that, or the mental health aspects and the physical health aspects of environmental and outdoor learning, or thinking about the ways that we can support our school systems and our teachers that are now being asked also to do things in completely different ways. I think we have a really important part to play in supporting our communities right now. And so I do just want to thank everyone for all of the extra hours you're putting in, all of the extra brain power you're putting in to rethink what you do every day. You're doing really important and really amazing, incredible work in a really short time frame. The great thing is we have this incredible network with so much expertise, so many ideas, and so many innovators. And so please know that you don't have to do this all on your own. And I would just encourage us all to lean on this network. And if you haven't yet, think about an organization that you can reach out to and see how you can partner to share some of this load. How can we do this together? Definitely reach out to us at CAEE so we can help support you in whatever's coming up. We do have a bunch of resources online in a shared Google folder. You can see the link there at the bottom of the screen. And there's also a calendar on that page with a bunch of different meetings, different opportunities to talk to other educators, get ideas, find out what's working, so we can lean on each other as much as we can in this period of big changes. Hopefully today will be a chance for a little self-care for ourselves as environmental educators. We do our best work when we're taken care of, when we're supported, and when we're inspired. So the sessions today, some of them will relate back to the situation we're in now, and some of them will provide other thinking and other ways to really tune in and make sure that we're strengthening our own capacity so that when we emerge from the context and the situation we're in now, we emerge even stronger and better prepared to offer high quality environmental education and learning across the state. This is a little bit of an experiment. This is our first virtual conference. So we know everybody's gonna have different capacities today. We are expecting that people are popping in and out to take care of things at work, at home, with families, with kids, all of those different things. So know that whatever you need to do, please make sure you're taking care of yourself today. We also just ask everyone to be patient with the technology. We usually, when we give webinars, we have the opportunity to move ourselves to the space with the best internet or the best devices, but we don't have that opportunity right now. So if there are mishaps, we just ask you to be a little patient with that today. I do want to just express huge gratitude for all of our presenters who jumped in to share their expertise and give us this opportunity to connect online, learn together today. We're all experts, we're all learners, so please, throughout the day, we invite you to share and to grow. And then we also would love your feedback. So at the end of each session, we have a volunteer who will be posting a link in the chat to give you an opportunity to say what you think so we can improve what we do for the future. Just to give you a little preview of the other sessions that are happening today, we've got the wild pedagogy, the wild edge of EE, introducing the citizen to the science, a session on revising Colorado's environmental education plan, queerness in environmental education, the nature of microbes, ways to integrate germs into environmental education, very relevant in this particular time frame. And then finally, we've got a session on the new AmeriCorps program and how you can get involved, and Ute STEM, learning about Colorado's first scientists. So we're very excited about the lineup today and all the ways that, all the opportunities we have for learning. We invite you to share what you're learning on these sessions with folks that can't be there. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. We would love to hear what your favorite parts of the day are. And with that, I would just love to turn it over to Deb Matlock, who is the founder of Wild Rhythms, to do just a couple minutes of intention setting for the day.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And thank you for that inspiring introduction. I feel like I already have an idea of my intention just reminded about how important environmental education is, and especially now as we are in this unprecedented situation of looking at ourselves as ecological beings and the world as very, very connected. So thanks for that startup. I want to welcome you all here. I'm seeing there's 98 participants, which honestly is making me get a little teared up, because in this time and in this space, 98 of you have decided that this is where you need to spend your time today. You've decided that this has value. You know, perhaps it's your heart saying, I know that environmental education is important, or perhaps it's your mind saying, I know this is important and I need to figure out what my next steps need to be and how to navigate. But whatever it is, I just want to thank you all so much for coming, and invite you to stop and just sort of take a deep breath wherever you are. If you want to close your eyes, that's fine too. Just take a deep breath and just sort of honor whatever it took for you to get here. Obviously for us today, it probably wasn't fighting through traffic or blizzards on Berthoud Pass getting up to YMCA of the Rockies. But it took effort for all of us. We had to make space. So a couple of deep breaths, recognizing that, and then kind of being into your heart and saying, okay, I work in environmental education in some way or another, or I'm interested in it in some way or another. And the first piece to say to yourself is why do you do that? What is that bigger reason for that? And remembering this now, I think, is a really critical time. I know this has been helping me personally in the last couple of weeks as I've been navigating changes in my work life. And what is that why? Why are you called to this work? Is it because you want to connect people to the land? Is it because you believe in scientific knowledge? Is it because you have a deep connection with all the animals in your life and you want to share that with others? Is it because you are on your own journey, saying, how do I fit in this world? I know for me, that's a part of it, is me trying to figure out, what does it mean on this planet to be human? So just take a deep breath. I'm going to stop talking for a minute and just ask your heart and your mind, what is your bigger why for this path in your life? And now to move, keep that question with you all day as part of your lens as you go through each of the sessions that you select. And let's add a second piece to that question. That piece is, who do you work for? And I'm not talking about the organization or the school. I'm not talking about whose name is on the paychecks. But I'm talking about, who is it that you really work for? Is it the land and the wildlife? Is it a certain group of people in a community? Is it a group of kids in a classroom who are right now at home trying to learn online? Is it a philosophical vision for a world that you would like to see and that you want to use your precious life energy to be part of that world being birthed? So now take another moment of silence and ask yourself, who do you really work for? Now coming back together, if any of you are inspired to share in the chat who it is that you work for, I would encourage you to do that. It would be fun to see who all of our bigger whys, how that's manifesting. And as that's happening, I want to offer you today, as you're sitting here saying, okay, what am I doing? I've got this whole day that I've laid out, whatever part of it for this conference. Combining that, who you work for and why you do what you do, why you're in this field in the first place, in whatever way that you are. Asking yourself, what is it that you would like to get from today? Is it personal inspiration? Is it a sense of connection to the larger environmental education community? Is it a little sense of normalcy and everything? I have to say, seeing the CAE logo when I got on here today, I thought, oh, right, something feels familiar about that. You know, what is it that you need out of today? What is it that you are here? Is it specific skills that you're coming for? So ask yourself that question, and if you've got something to write on, or maybe you write it in your mind, just what is that intention for today that you can hold as you're making choices and moving through the different workshops? As you're listening to the speakers sharing their ideas, you know, when we have our intention clear, we can sometimes pull those little nuggets more easily out of all the information. The little nuggets that pull right into what our intention is and what we need from today. So now take another quick minute, and a quick minute, that's kind of interesting, right? A minute, and think about what is it you need from today. And also enjoy a little bit of the chatter and the chat box of who everybody is working for. Okay, so some of the beautiful things coming out of the chat. I work for my children. I work for Mother Nature and the children of the world, the greater good. I work for my granddaughter and future generations. I work for everyone that needs empowerment and encouragement. I work for my students so that they can be stewards of the planet. This is a question I would say let's hold with ourselves, not just today, but as we move forward in our career. It's like, let's hold the bigger why question, the why do I do this, not only for today, but as we move forward. And for today, let's really honor ourselves, whatever that intention was that you came up with, or maybe you're still coming up with it. Keep that front and center as you're moving through all the amazing workshops and sharing in breakout rooms with your colleagues. What is it that you need from today? Because I can tell you, as somebody who has been going to these teaching outside the boxes for pretty much 2 decades. Now, never online, this is a new one, but every single time I go, I get something that I think I needed, and then I get more than I thought I needed. And so at the end of today, I would encourage you to take a moment and say, okay, what else did I get today that I had no idea that I needed? So with that, unless Katie has anything else she wants to add to this intention piece, I just wish you all a beautiful conference, and thank you all for coming, and really look forward to sharing with all of you in our electronic virtual ecology.
All right, thank you so much, Deb. That was beautiful and just a perfect way to set up the day. What I would love to do now is to go ahead and introduce our speaker for this morning, Taishya Adams. And let me tell you a little bit about Taishya. Taishya was appointed by Governor Polis to serve on the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. She was the first African-American woman in the commission's history. She also serves as the Outdoor Afro Colorado co-lead. And Outdoor Afro, if you're not familiar with it, is a national nonprofit organization with leadership networks all around the country who connect thousands of people to outdoor experiences and who are changing the face of conservation. Taishya also serves as the founding board president for New Legacy Charter School, a public charter high school and early learning center for teen parents and their children in Aurora, Colorado. She currently works at the American Institutes for Research as a senior education consultant, laser focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. Previously, Taishya worked with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, the DC Public Charter Schools Board, Global Classrooms, Washington, DC, and the Children Defense Fund Freedom Schools. So we're so excited to welcome her on board and have her share a little bit about her work in equity and how we can improve the work we do in environmental education by engaging in equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice work.
Aw, thank you so much, Katie, for that wonderful introduction. Although I will say that if you'll recall when we met, the day that we met for lunch, the power went out on Pearl Street, and where we were eating, everything just stopped. And we just kind of looked at each other and just calmly kept meeting, waiting, using our things. Again, I think that it's that kind of attitude, like right off the bat, you know, when change happens, when the unexpected arises, we're able to pivot. And I think a lot of that has to do with our commitment and our deep understanding of the planet and the cycles of the world, and recognizing that it's not always going to be spring, right? It's not always going to be summer when it's warm and the powers are, there's going to be storms, and there's going to be, you know, challenges and barriers and obstacles. But, you know, I always think back to the water and the role that water plays and how it always finds a way. It doesn't seem aggressive, but it can erode over time. It just keeps at it, that wave. And sometimes you got to take the tide comes in, and it's just that time for quiet, and then the tide comes out with a rush, and then it comes in and it comes out. And so thank you so much for having me today. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to transition us to the slide deck. Hopefully everything works according to plan. We'll see how it goes. I have already been kicked off of this system and kicked back in. So I welcome your patience as we transition this presentation from in-person to a virtual setting. So I wanted to start us off again, acknowledging the many changes that are happening in our world.
Still don't know what I was waiting waiting for, and my time was running wild in dead-end streets, and every time I thought I got it made, it seemed the taste was not so sweet. So I turned myself to face me, but I've never caught a glimpse how the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast to take that test. Changes, turn and face the strain. Changes, don't wanna be a richer man. Changes, turn and face the strain. Changes, it's gonna have to be a different man. Time may change me, but I can't trace time.
Beautiful. Time may change. Can people hear me? Okay, good. Time may change me, but I can't change time. And I think that's just a beautiful message for us to keep in mind as we move through this presentation today. And honestly, change was already a theme in my presentation. So the universe has conspired to make that change visceral for all of us. So I wanted to talk and kick us off with just the 3 levels of change. And so as Katie mentioned in her introduction, there's so much change happening in this world through this pandemic. And in my mind, everything is back on the table. I think of those problems that keep me up at night, things like obviously poverty, not having access to healthcare, not having equitable representation in our government, in our organizations. Really, every day we make changes in our world and in our lives. And so I wanted to start us off with the 3 levels of change, because that's really how I'm framing this talk today with you. And I always start the 3 levels at with the individual, and then I move on to organizational culture, and then that's the system, those policies, those practices, those regulations, those codified things that are written down. And so those 3 dimensions are what we're going to explore today. And within change, there's 2 sub levels. And the first is the adaptive. It's not visible, but really it's in the heart of equity. And it's the change in our hearts and our minds in order to then change the actions that we do. The second is technical. It's more concrete. It's those policies and requirements and tools and schedules and things that I mentioned before. And so what we want to do, or what we're going to explore today, are how does equity and diversity, inclusion, and justice intersect in all 3 of these levels. Oftentimes, we think about these challenges that we're facing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's been a lot of investment at the individual level. I love an implicit bias training like the next person. However, one person is not enough to change a culture and a system. You need other people and working in community to do that. And there's not one piece that can be ignored. And so I invite you again in this exploration. So starting at the individual level, reflecting on our own identities. So, and we're gonna get into an identity later and how I'm defining that term, and understanding the historical and present barriers and opportunities. And we're gonna talk about asset and deficit-based thinking and approaches later today as well. And so, who am I? Who am I? I am Taishya Adams, as I mentioned, and Katie mentioned some very lovely things during my introduction as well. And I looked at, as I approach this question, and I'm often struck by how in our culture, it tends to be, when you ask, who are you, you'll default to what you do professionally. And so I have the professional pieces on the bottom. But when I really think about who I am, it's really this personal pieces. I'm human. That's the first thing I think of. And I'm a daughter of a wonderful mother and father, a sister to my caring brother, a friend, a lover, earth tender, cancer survivor, global citizen, And then professionally, I do the things that Katie referenced. And I used to have a little asterisk because I also have a tension between what the things that I'm civically engaged in, where I volunteer my time, and those things that I'm paid to do. And over the last decade, I've started to erase that line. Just because I'm volunteering, I'm still doing that. I mean, I could be paid to do that, and I choose not to because I have the opportunity to get paid doing something else. And so finding that balance between ourselves, really unpacking the variety of different levels of identity that we have is really important. And so speaking of identity, there's a variety of different lenses that one can use. And so here are just a few lenses that are typically used when people are talking about identity, those things that are definitively recognized and known, things that make us a member of a group. And so oftentimes you'll hear race, ethnicity, gender. I think when we talk about diversity, those are the primary levers that I see most often mentioned. However, again, you know, I love the pandemic because again, it's elevated some of these other identities that sometimes get buried. So this relationship status, those who are married versus not, those who have children versus not, that's gonna matter, right? When you're now being tasked with working from home and working with your children and bringing their education. So again, these different identities and dimensions will come in and out. They're very fluid based on your context. Language is another one. Your profession or education level. I oftentimes, you know, I love a task force. But what I've noticed in the task force is that they tend to ask like the head of the organization to be on the task force, which is great. That's only one perspective. That's only one level of information. That's only one diversity lens that is represented there. And so challenging us to go into each of these different dimensions is really important. And acknowledging those. There was a time when, you know, when you were in your professional lenses or in your professional role, we were asked to keep our identities out of the room. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or non-binary. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, yellow. It doesn't matter. And that's where we're going to get into that cultural blindness. And we'll talk about that later. And what equity, diversity, inclusion allows us to do is invite us back in, invite our whole selves back in to every part of our lives and not just in our personal lives. And so now we're going to turn to find out who's here, who's in the room today. And so now we're going to do fancy stuff, y'all. We're getting ready to do fancy stuff. So come with me. And we'll start off with, where were you born? So what I need you to do is in the chat box, there is a pollev.com/Taishya Adams. Good luck with that. The Y is silent, but you can copy paste right in there. And then 669, I didn't pick that number. And then you just click the map wherever you're from. And hopefully it'll start to pop up. So I'll give you some time to get our technology going. We're gonna have a couple of slides where we're going to be, you're gonna be sharing who's in the virtual room, who's in the virtual conference in PD today. Oh, I see him popping up. Okay, another pandemic silver lining. It has really forced me to use all of my virtual tools in the toolbox. So I see a lot of folks are represented from all across the United States. I see some folks up in, this is also going to test my map skills. So I see it's somewhere up in, where is that? Is that France? I can't see that. Let me see the chat box. Let's see. Anybody in the chat box? No, that's just a link in there. Oh, wow, we've got Europe, we've got South America, lots all across the country, lots of representatives. Okay, that's very exciting. Okay, now I'm gonna go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. Thank you for sharing that. All right, now I wanna know, how long have you worked in environmental education? And this just gives us an idea of who's in the room, the knowledge that's in the room right now. So I don't know if you all heard, and I hate to be the one to tell you, but Bill Withers died, I don't know when, yesterday, today, not sure. But every time I think of him, I think of that song, Lean on Me. And as I'm looking at these bars come in and out and see that 13% of the folks on this call have over 20 years of experience. And I also get excited by those that are relatively new, brand spanking new, as well as those in the 1 to 5 year range. And it's interesting to see that that's the most represented here. So I will be sure to keep that in mind, not only during this session, but also when you're having your breakout sessions later today. Again, all of these identity points are important for us to know so that then we can really bring our whole selves and know how much knowledge and skills that we actually have as a part of our community. All right, let's move on to our racial and ethnic groups that do you most affiliate. And again, I apologize if your racial and ethnic group, I meant to do an other slide and other option, and I did not do that. So I apologize for not doing that. And I will be mindful of doing that the next time. Again, okay, so it looks like primarily white, few Latino, Latinx, Hispanic. No Asian Pacific Islanders on the call. Interesting. So few of Black African American that it doesn't, both A and B doesn't even register as a percentage point, right? And so in this slide, I want us to think about who are the communities that we're serving. If you did a similar activity with the communities that you're serving, would the results look like this? If it doesn't, I just want you to put that in the parking lot. We're going to come back to that later. But this is one of those representation pieces that really matter. And we want to think about how we can strengthen the pipeline to address these issues. And not just the pipeline coming from elementary school, but the pipeline in college, post-secondary, mid-career transfers, lots of different opportunities to change this. So maybe next year they'll let me come back and I'll just do a small breakout session and see if there's been some changes in some of these slides over time. All right.
Taishya, this is Nicole.
Yes, hello, Nicole.
Just really quick, we're getting a black box over your slides. I think it might be your chat box.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I moved it. Can you see it now?
Looks like we're still seeing it, but I think.
Oh, I worked so hard. Can you see what is the first language you learned?
Yes, that's better having it on the right side. It's not.
Okay, good to know.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, y'all. All right, so put your languages in. This is very exciting. I love a word cloud. Unfortunately, it just gets bigger and bigger when it gets to the different words, but Polish, Spanish, Norwegian, love it. American Sign Language, yes. German, yes. Polish, Dutch. Oh, love it, love it. And again, you know, oftentimes we focus when I hear or experience sessions on cultural competence, the focus primarily tends to be on culture. And that linguistic piece is often missed, unless you're dealing with English learners. I'm using air quotes here, not because I'm trying to mock it, but more so to say that, again, that type of language puts English in the center, right? And so we have to be very mindful about how we can be better stewards of not only the planet, but these the rich nature, the richness of linguistics, right? So the Alaskans have however many words for snow. Other languages have different words for different types of soil, different types of rain. So when we lose languages, when we only defer to one language, we lose incredible amounts of knowledge base that have been honed over generations. And so that's why we want to draw back in. Remember when I was talking earlier about we want to bring our whole selves to our workplace, to our lives, to our world. And so that language piece, you know, when I see these first languages that you learned, you know, I want to make sure that I want to make sure that there is a space for not only acknowledging and honoring, but integrating, engaging with. Learning about using there may be things in those other languages that can help to problem solve other issues that are happening in communities that don't speak that language. So again, a very important component. All right, so now, again, we talked about these identity pieces, and I was introduced to this video a couple of years ago by a wonderful colleague of mine, Dia Jackson, or Dr. Dia Jackson, and I wanted to share to you today. One thing I didn't put on our polls of identity is where you are on your equity spectrum. I always say everybody's on an equity journey. And so for those of you who have seen this video before, I've seen this video multiple times. Every time I watch it, I get another little nugget that I hadn't thought of before. So I invite you, if you've seen this or not, to just take a moment. And here we go, technology. Everybody just breathe in, cross your fingers, put some good vibes out there so that it works. Here we go.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble is
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just the gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on. It was very awkward.
I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when they talk about slavery in high school and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that for some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.
Okay, I always get tripped out when they play that. Sorry. So I'm sorry. Alas. So we're actually going to break into breakout sessions right now. We're going to have groups of 5, and during your breakout session, I invite you to share your name, the organization you work with. It's an opportunity, even during this keynote kickoff, to have some opportunities to talk with each other and to reflect on the identity work that we talked about before, as well as privilege, what those identities, the different privileges that some of those identities have. And so during those conversations, I invite you to use these frames, these commitments for engaging with each other. And I got these from Courageous Conversations About Race, which is out of the Pacific Education Group. And so the first is staying engaged. I know, especially on the virtual setting, it's hard to stay engaged. It's harder to stay engaged. So I invite you to do that. Obviously, we know that you're at home, so if your child needs you, or his partner needs you, or an animal needs you, you have to do that. Politely excuse yourself. Speak your truth. Again, we're really wanting to talk from your perspective, not what you heard from your friend or your family member, but your perspective. I want you to experience discomfort. It is okay. That's what's also different about this work, this equity, diversity, inclusion work. It requires us to be uncomfortable. So experience that. If you feel that, you're doing right. You're doing right. And then expect and accept non-closure. These are large conversations. This is a journey over time, over a lifetime. And so expect and support non-closure. So when you're in your breakout sessions, I want you to introduce yourself, and then as a group, just respond to these following prompts. What resonated with you from the video? In what ways may privilege show up in environmental education programs, in organizations, or activities? And who has privilege in the sector? And in what situations? Because privileges, as I mentioned, like identities, it can change based on the context. And so that's where, how does privilege present itself in your boardroom or in your leadership team versus when you are working with your stakeholder group, or when you're working with an advisory group, or when you're working with your volunteers? So again, just the dimensions of the sector that you're working in and the situations that you're working with. So I'm gonna turn it over to someone to move you into the breakout session. Right. Oh, let me give you your time frame. Let's see, we're doing very good on time. So you've got a good 10 minutes to have this conversation in your breakout session.
Great, thanks Taishya. I'm going to automatically assign you all to breakout rooms, and it'll give you a little pop-up and direct you to those separate rooms. And then we will give you a heads up when you've got just a short amount of time left. But enjoy. And the conversation or the questions are posted in the chat room as well, or the chat box. Thanks.
Will I be put in a breakout session?
I believe you will. I can move you around if if you would like.
No. All right, let's do this.
Okay, here goes.
Hello, I don't know how to, okay, here we go, wait, one moment, please, I'm coming back. Okay, now I'm going to the thing. All right, didn't do a perfect one-to-one, but you know, it tried. Please wait for me, there we go. All right, so, all right, I need to turn that off. I can see myself on the Facebook Live, not good. So I changed that off. Hello, welcome back everybody. I hope you had some rich conversations during the breakout session. Thank you to the wonderful group that I got an opportunity to chat with today. And you know, I think one of the things that we talked about as far as the things that resonated with us during about the video, and 2 of us had seen it before and 2 of us had not. But all of us remarked on just the emotional charge that came up when we were watching the video. How the video and how it played out challenged our own notions of how we thought it was going to play out. And then I love the conversation around how privilege shows up. And I think it's important for us to have these specific conversations about how it shows up at each of these levels, at the activity level, at the organizational level, at the programmatic level. But some of the things that came up for us was around language, so English as the dominant language, and how do we better serve our not only our students but their families through ensuring that we've got translators and interpreters and those kinds of services. The other piece was even that came up for us was the privilege of geography. So, you know, living in a rural community, you have more access to the outdoors. So when you're doing programs with students that have access to the outdoors, that programming is going to look different than students that may not have as much access to the outdoors, those who are living in urban settings or even suburban settings. And so the privilege of having access versus the privilege of not having access. I mean, right now we're on shelter in place. If you're in Denver, you're not supposed to leave Denver County. I live in Boulder County. So I can just mosey on out my door right into the mountains. That's access. That's a privilege. I have the privilege of living in Boulder County. And therefore, I have the responsibility of how do I pay it forward? How do I ensure and provide opportunity and access to those that don't have these privileges? And I think a lot of you are breaking those barriers through the work that you do. So thank you for that service. But then also, who has privileges in each situation? You know, oftentimes people will look at me as an African-American woman and think, oh, well, she doesn't have any privilege. Oh no, I live in Boulder County, I've got a job, I, you know, can speak multiple languages, not well. And so, you know, again, it is not, sometimes we have these privilege conversations as a deficit, with a deficit approach. And again, we'll get to this deficit versus asset later. I'm noticing I should have put that slide earlier because I've made 2 references to it. Lifelong learner, even in this process. But oftentimes we think of identity and privilege as a deficit. And what we need to do is think about how do we look at it as an opportunity, going back to water, to really expand the door, to open the window, to open the doors, to let people in, and vice versa. So I have a little reference here, a continued learning activity or reference. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It is primarily exploring white privilege, and it provides, I think, about 50 questions, similar to questions like, can you get Band-Aids that match your skin tone? Can you get greeting cards that are representative of your family and friends? Just those everyday things that you don't really think about. Some colleagues of mine had a virtual happy hour, and they did this game where you could put your photo in and it'll make a Renaissance painting. I looked at the types of Renaissance painting that were the examples, and there was all white people. And I thought to myself, I'm not even gonna play this game because this game wasn't designed for me. And then I Googled Black people in the Renaissance, and a whole page came up of people. And so I am not an engineer or a coder or anything. It took me one Google search to see that there were more than just white people during the Renaissance period. So it's those little things like that we do every day, that individual level that we need to do. So again, we are a work in progress. I like to start in the mirror. I love this quote here. If you are doing it right, It will and should be uncomfortable. You should be challenged, and you should be read. And I've got the screen in my thing, so I can't read the thing. Okay? You should be uncomfortable, challenged, and ready to work towards a transformational process that ends in visible change, going back to those changes. So we have the adaptive changes that you cannot see, and then you've got the technical changes where you can see them. And so you want to do all this internal individual work so that your actions reflect this deeper understanding, this cultural competence, and we'll get into that later. And so every day we have a choice where we can step up, we can step aside. Oh, hey, I've done this actually I looked around one day, and I was on this project a couple of years ago, and I looked around and it was all Black women. And I thought, oh, it is so wonderful to be in a room full of Black women, woo! However, what we were working on was beyond just the Black female experience. There needed to be other people in that room. And so I stepped aside and I said, hey, let's invite so-and-so, let's invite so-and-so, let's invite so-and-so. If this is supposed to be representative of everyone in this organization, I cannot be in a room just full of Black women. And so that's that step aside. And then the step down. This is important, especially for those of you who are in the 20 years plus and that succession planning. If you are seeing that your leadership team is primarily one identity, whether it be race, gender, etc., and you're working with stakeholder groups that do not match that identity representation, you need to be thinking about your succession planning. How are you ensuring that that diversity in thought, race, gender, etc., are represented on your leadership team? That step down piece is something that is one of the most powerful things that you can do with your privilege sometimes. And again, another lens I like to use is just, am I dismantling systemic oppression? Am I maintaining it by being quiet? Or am I reinforcing it? I have created policies that have reinforced systemic oppression. I took a pause there because I know it sounds like, what do you mean? You know, when I create documents that are only in 2 languages, English and Spanish, I'm holding up English and Spanish. I am reinforcing the inequities in our system. So again, every day, every action, every thought is an opportunity, is an invitation to have that transformational process. So I'm going to close out oh, no, I'm not. Just kidding, there's homework. So this was supposed to be an 1.5-hour session. We got consolidated to an hour. So we've got some extender activities. So I would love and invite you to reflect on your own, how often and in what ways do you reflect on your own cultural and linguistic background, identities, biases, and privileges? What are the ways in which you can learn about other cultural background, identities, and privileges? And Katie, you mentioned in the top of this, you know, about during the land acknowledgement about Indigenous communities and how you can learn more is by reading, watching movies, listening to music. And again, I just invite folks to also realize that you know, how can we engage with people who identify in these ways authentically? And this is what I love most about the outdoors, is that it provides a more welcoming place, environment to step in and be courageous and take risks. And so there are organizations like Native Women's Wilderness, Natives Outdoors. If you are really committed to deepening your understanding of Indigenous issues and strengthening your relationship, you need to go out and meet them. You need to go to the powwow that happens in Denver and in Boulder. You need to go to when they have events and hikes and things like that. You can go to sessions. I mean, you need to meet and intersect with other people. We'll never see our own back. You need to engage with others. And that is actually a beautiful segue to the next section, which is the cultural level. So why is it critical to reclaim our cultural and linguistic history and recognize and validate others? And so I have this long quote. I don't have time to go through it right now because I'm running a little bit behind. You know, the slide deck will be available to you. But I was invited to serve on a panel talking about conservation a couple of years ago. And I just had to have a pause, because to me that term is weighted, it's loaded, it's heavy. And I came across this quote, and it soothed my soul in the sense that it articulated why I had a weird tension around it, around this term. And it's because history is still alive today. So I think of, even Teddy Roosevelt in 1907, and, after doing, and he is seen as a hero to some, to those who identify with him. But for those of us who don't identify with them, after being enslaved, we were, my ancestors were granted land. Well, some of that land was used to make national parks, not to mention Poopy, that's my cat, the indigenous communities who also lost their land. And so it's really important to acknowledge that. Honestly, every time I use the term, I always take a moment to acknowledge that it's a weighted term, it's a heavy term, and it's not automatically positive. And that just creates a space where it's an invitation where we can all come in. And so thinking about the 3 levels of culture, I love 3s in general, notice this about me. But you've got the surface, you've got the shallow, and you've got the deep. And we spend a ton of time talking about the surface level. And that includes, the different languages, the foods that we eat, the music that we listen to, the literature that we read. But there's these deeper pieces, this unspoken rules around personal space, around eye contact, around level of honesty, emotional expression, nonverbal communication. And then if you dive even a little deeper, you get into those unspoken gender roles, those unspoken religious implications, those values and prejudices, the definitions and ways that we define family, spirituality, these world views, and they have an immense emotional impact on trust. Ultimately, all of this work is around that can result in healing the distrust, the mistrust, the miscommunication that has happened. And so again, it's an invitation. And so, again, we're using a lot of words these days to combat that, to deepen and to understand. And so I want to take a moment of reflection. I need you to get close to your computers, open that chat box. And I want you to think and reflect on these terms of diversity, cultural and linguistic competence, equity, inclusion. Pick a word and type in the chat box how you define that term. This one. And I'm looking in the chat box, and I'm moving the chat box over so y'all can see it, or so you can still see the screen. And I'm trying to make it a little bigger. All right, let me see. All right. Beth, thank you, Beth. Austin, we got fairness for equity. What else we got? Come on, get out. I don't see fingers typing. I can see you. Inclusion, including a variety of voices and experiences. Inclusion, embracing differences. The bare minimum. That's right. All right, so thank you for sharing that. But here's the thing. Notice just in the few responses, there may be some overlap, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. We are all coming to this term, similar with conservation, with our own experiences and knowledge of what that means and application of what that means. And so I'm not going to come here today and tell you these are the definitions for these terms. That's not what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you this is how I'm defining these terms. And I invite you to do the same. No one has a lock on what these terms mean. And as we get to understand each other and ourselves more, these terms evolve. When I was a kid, there was only LGBT. That was it, LGTB. There was no other conversation around any other of the others. And over the years, LGBTQAI+, because we've evolved, we've embraced, we're expanding our understanding, our acceptance, and our knowledge and appreciation. And so, as I said, I'm not going to tell you that these are the definitions. These are just ways that I define these terms. And I'm not going to get into all of them. Maybe we'll do another breakout session another time where we can dive more deeply into all of them. But today I really wanted to focus on how I define equity, because it's my favorite. And honestly, when I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I see those three lined up, I always have to make a mental note. And I don't argue with people about how they're using these terms. I just say, okay, that's how you're using this term, because to me, equity is inclusive of diversity and inclusion. So to me, I see equity in these 4 lenses. So representation, pretty clear. Again, and that's those identity pieces, not just race and gender, et cetera, but all of the representation of diversity of thought, et cetera. I'm going to skip to access. I hear a lot when I hear about DEI specific projects. It tends to be access focused, making sure that everyone has access to an experience or a program or a product or a resource. And that's great. But do they have a meaningful role in that? And so when we talk about what are the privileges that your organization have, you have the privileges of designing what your program is going to look like. You have the privilege of designing who's going to staff it. You have the privilege of deciding when is it going to be held, where is it going to be held, how often it's going to be held. You have the privilege of determining if it's going to cost money or not. So when you think about meaningful engagement, meaningful participation for the different communities that you serve, it's really, really important to think about ensuring that they have a meaningful role across the decision-making spectrum. And so you can take this slide with you later. There's a deeper dive into each of the different lenses that I offered. And again, I just have to go. No, I don't have time. All right, cultural competence spectrum. All right, so now we're going to play this other game where we're going to see. I'm going to talk about this different continuum. And then I'm going to ask you to get out your annotate. There's an annotate button on your screen somewhere, and then you can select that, and then you select draw, and then you can draw on it. But here is the kind of scale or continuum. And so, we think of destructiveness. So those are actively opposing. Often think of, I don't know, the Klan. Or actually any civilization, you will find a group that is trying to destroy the culture of another group. Then you've got the incapacity. So, again, there is a lacking that effectiveness of understanding the needs, interests, preferences of different cultures and the linguistic dimensions in your organization and the differences there. There's the blindness, the cultural blindness, and that's often times people refer to this as color blindness. So, again, just erasing those different identities. There's a lack of diversity, not only of thought, but different, gender type, et cetera. Different lack of resources and structures committed and devoted to deepening people's understanding and knowledge of different cultures and languages and their importance and the role that they play in their work. A lot of folks right now are in this pre-competence time where they're starting to have an awareness of these issues and their impact to their work, starting to construct and conduct needs assessments. I'm seeing a lot of landscape analysis, a lot of needs assessments that are happening in the space, and that's wonderful. It's kind of getting you ready for that next stage. And then the competence is where it starts to be embedded in your mission. If there are specific policies, there's a fiscal commitment beyond just a diversity officer or diversity something. There is a commitment to ensuring that all staff, all programmers, all board members have access to training opportunities, have access to mentorship opportunities. There's data collection that's being done. It's being disaggregated as needed. And then you get to that proficiency level. And I struggled with the proficiency because I'm like, well, can you really be proficient? This, culture is always revolving. No, proficient is not perfection. You'll never perfect. You'll never be perfect. But you can be proficient by hiring staff members that have this expertise. I don't want to hear that there are people that don't have this expertise. I run into them every day, especially now people need jobs. So I have no tolerance for that because I know that there are people who meet all of those identity categories that have the skills and experience in the outdoors. It's just, are we committed to ensuring that we are going to take the time and resources to really identify, onboard those people and make sure that when we bring them into our organizations, they're not the fly in the milk. And I can't tell you how many times I'm the fly in the milk. It means that you need to make sure that staff is culturally competent, and so that I'm not coming in to assimilate, but rather I'm coming in to transform, that it requires a transformation on how we do everything. And it also means on the role of advocacy and adding to the knowledge base. So contributing to the knowledge base through blogs or media or reports or research, etc. So lots of different opportunities. All right, so where are you? Use your drawing tool. Where are you on your, on this spectrum? And I'm using my tool now to see, and I'm gonna draw where I believe that my organization, not where you are individually, but where your organization or where you work is. All right, I see a lot of pre-competence. Okay, I made an assumption about that, but it's nice to have that validated with data. All right. Oh, question mark. That's interesting. Yes. And again, I'll include a resource that gives these different definitions. It's actually from the health field. I have found when I've been doing research on equity, inclusion, etc., I have noticed that the mental health and physical health field are ahead of the game when it comes to this work over the education field specifically. And so don't be afraid of intersector collaboration and acknowledgement. Wow, a lot in that area. Okay, that's good to know, Katie. Well, maybe we'll do a follow-up that's specific to folks in that particular area. All right, so now I'm going to stop doing that and move to the next slide. So let's see if I can do that. Nope, okay, I gotta do something else. Nope. All right. Hey, yo. All right, wait. I gotta clean it off. Okay, hold on. Thank you for your patience as I figure this out. Hey, yo. All right, here we go. Here's one of my favorite slides, and I know I'm coming down on time, so I'm already like, we didn't even get to the systemic. It's okay. There'll be more later. So in doing this cultural competency work, I've noticed there's a lot of, again, focus on the deficit and not necessarily on the assets. And this is something that came on my radar screen last year. I'm still unpacking it myself, but it is from the University of California, Kara Yozo, and it's from the Whose Culture Has Capital, a critical race theory discussion of community cultural wealth. And these are the lenses that are under community cultural wealth. So you've got aspirational, there's hope in spite of resistance, linguistic, working in at least 2 or more languages, going back to what I said about the different ways that you can say water or snow, or all of that it adds to that knowledge base. There's the familial, so having different shared values, making connection. Social, it takes a village, so having an expanded network. Navigational, this is one of my favorite spaces, components of this, but especially for those who are working in disinvested communities. Notice I didn't say underserved, I said disinvested. Disinvested puts the onus on those who made the decision not to invest in communities. And when you see community revitalization, you then know that it's possible. Oh, we could have had a beautiful park. Oh, we could have had a beautiful school. Oh, we could have had all of these things. But the community, those in charge of that community, those resources, decided to disinvest in those communities. But when you live in a disinvested community, you have this wonderful skill set to be able to navigate between spaces that were not necessarily made for you. And so sometimes when you're taking children out who are in cities into more nature-based areas, they may have different approaches or be able to problem solve in different ways that those who are in those communities hadn't even thought about. So that's where you want to acknowledge those assets that they bring to the table. And then the resistance, making an active, conscious choice to resist the status quo. That is an asset. So again, we'll have another time to walk through that. So sorry, it's really great stuff, really great work. I don't have time to do that. All right, systemic level. So I didn't know what picture to put here, but this is one of my favorite pictures. It's from the Summit for Action that that Parker puts on from the Eco Inclusive and along with other partner organizations. But when we think about systems, it's oftentimes like this big brother, like up there. No, systems is people, right there. In this photo, you're seeing people that work in education, you're seeing people that work in health, you're seeing people who work in Colorado, you see people that are work across the country, you see people that are working internationally. We are a system. And when we come together and we decide what are our policies, our tools, our processes, that's when we create and we codify what that system is. The system is us. And so here's another thing that I want to say about the system and this implicit bias piece. This is where the individual meets the system, meets the cultural and the systemic. There is no such thing as a neutral educational process. There is no such thing. It is not neutral. It cannot be neutral. It is either conformity or assimilation into the present system, and you conform to it, students, or it's the practice of freedom. It is where people can deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. And I think this pandemic speaks very much to the latter part of this. This is no longer a space where all right, little children, come into our American system or in our global system, because that system has evolved, it is transformed. We need to be responsive to that transformation. And that's where that system come into place. Here it is at the very end, the comparison between asset and deficit-based approaches. And so, again, take a look at this. With the organization you work with, where would they fall on this? Would you say that they're more needs-driven, problems-focused, externally focused, or are they strength-based? Are they looking for the opportunity? Are they looking inside, internally? I love these last questions. What is present that we can build on? Oftentimes we come into disinvested community and think, oh, I'm your savior. I'm coming in and I'm gonna give you access to all these wonderful, aren't I wonderful? And not acknowledging that culture, that rich cultural community wealth that these people that we're engaging with, these stakeholders that we're engaging with, these partners that we're engaging with, bring to the table. That acknowledgement is critical. And this last question is it may lead to new and unexpected responses. All right. Yeah, I don't have time for that one. All right. Here are some concrete resources that you can use with your organization. This is a tool that I learned about a few years ago. It's called the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmark. It is an organization that offers the framework for free. If you want to explore it with your organization, I encourage you to follow up directly with this group. They can walk you through the protocols of the different categories, but it's broken into 4 big buckets. So strategy, people, connection, and external. And then within there are these 14 different dimensions. And so you can and within each of them, there's a rubric, a 4-point scale, Likert scale, and it gives you explicit examples of how to move across the different each of these different categories. And so I invite you to take a look at those, and the link is provided, will be provided afterwards. This is my other new favorite resource. I have 1 minute left, I know that. So a lot of us are doing evaluation and research. Oftentimes we're getting grant money, so we got to do evaluation anyway. You're doing interviews, focus groups, document reviews, you're doing observations sometimes. And this resource, this guidebook, really looks at 7 inequities in the world, and then it situates them into how community organizations the role that they can play to address these inequities, how researchers can address these inequities, and how funders can address these inequities in all of these different dimensions. And I'm like literally in love with this resource, or if there's others that are interested in exploring it, please do not hesitate. I wanted to briefly talk about, I know I'm over, so I'm just gonna, intra-sector collaboration. So, as somebody who comes in from the traditional, again, air quotes, because it's all a construct, the traditional K or P-12 educational space, the school system space, oftentimes environmental education is an add-on, it's a supplement. And so how do we do a better job of translating our work so that we are more deeply embedded? And y'all, we are right on time, because as many of you know, Colorado is revisiting our environmental education standards this upcoming year. And this is a beautiful time to revisit what our collaboration is going to look like across these different entities that we serve. And again, happy to talk more about this at a previous at another time, or with those that are interested, or as the work continues to evolve. Then I wanted to highlight this cross-sector collaboration. And this is where environmental educators have an advantage, because your work naturally fits to these other sectors of health, of workforce, and of education. I noticed that environmental education primarily focuses on education side of the house. But again, when I talked earlier about that pipeline, how can you better work with internship programs, et cetera, to ensure and strengthen the pipeline, and volunteer programs, and being creative about the volunteerism opportunities, so they're not just happening during the work day. But again, this pandemic, everything is on the table now, right? My organization, we have flex time now. We can either work in the mornings, in the evening, in the weekends, or we can work during the week. So that everything is back on the table. And in closing, I didn't know I have a good picture for the closing. So I just put a picture of all of these things, reminding us that we are community. We can lean on each other. But in order to do that, we need to know who we are and who we are working with. We need to understand all of our own identities. And for those of you who identify as white, I really challenge you to move beyond and really start to learn about your ethnicity. Where are your people from? Are they from where in Europe? But learning more about where you're from, what languages did they speak, did your family members speak? All of those things matter. And then translating them up and rolling them up into, as a group, as a team. Are you aware of the different identities and skills and knowledge that your teammates bring to your organization? And then as a system, does the system reflect the identities and advantages and experiences of all those that are being served? And so remember, how do we get to equitable? We start with people. Then we move to policy, and then those policies become practices. So I got a little homework for you. What role can you play at the individual level? I want you to think about ways you can step up, step aside, and step down. At the cultural level, I want you to think about how you can leverage that cultural community capital or community wealth that we talked about before with the organization, so that again, you're not seeing them, or you're not putting yourself in the role of a savior, but rather as a partner. That your destiny, your ability to live and thrive is intrinsically linked to the communities that you're serving. And then lastly, systemically, how do you use your power, privilege, and platform to leverage these practices to dismantle systemic oppression? Stay in touch. I've got a million different ways that you can stay in touch with me. I'm not gonna lie, I don't pat myself on the back very much about things that I do. My LinkedIn page is fire. So please join me on LinkedIn. I love to see what you're sharing. If you have any questions about the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I'm on the commission. I'm happy to connect you with our amazing education staff. American Institutes for Research, we do technical assistance as well as research. I'd love to explore ways that we can do more equitable research around environmental education. And then Outdoor Afro, as a leader, we're always looking for partnerships so that we can continue to reassert our space in the outdoors and share our experience and knowledge, but also to build community together. So thank you again. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for letting me run over by however many 5 minutes. I did very great all in all. Have a wonderful rest of your session today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep your head up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taishya. This is such an important message for us to hear. Virtual round of applause for sharing all of these great thoughts with us. I love the invitation for us to really think about the opportunity that we have right now and thinking about this pandemic through an asset-based lens, and how can we be stronger and start to think about how we eliminate some of these inequities that are illuminated right now. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all of this important work and important message. We would love your feedback. There is a link to a survey in the chat, or you can also find it on our website on the virtual PD Day page. So would love to get your feedback on this session and any other sessions that you attend. We'll be starting the next one in 10 minutes or so at 10:45. So would love to see you back here. And thanks again so much for joining us. We will see you during the rest of the day.